Hi, everyone. We are back, and I have the honor of introducing you to Hazel Krebs, who's my friend and who is someone who was here last year. Actually, her first event with She Is Me was last year. We are so happy to welcome her back, and she's actually going to be sitting on a panel this week. So please welcome Hazel Krebs.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It is always great to see you. I am grateful for you and grateful for the work that you do. And I want to say thank you for everyone who is here, whether you're here live or later on. I am grateful for each and every one of you. By the way, thank you for being you. I am Hazel Krebs. I'm an author and speaker, inspiring the world to live enthusiastically. Since we are all over the country and the world, I'll put in context where I am speaking from. I am in the Kansas City metro area. If you don't know, Kansas City crosses two states. I live in the Kansas side of Kansas City. I've been here for about 10 years. Grew up in Nebraska, just up the road here in Omaha, Nebraska, for my life until my mid-30s when I moved here to Kansas City. I moved here, married. I have two kids. I have two teenagers, 14 and 15, and I absolutely love having teenagers. When I say two teenagers, I usually get a reaction from people, but I love it. For example, just yesterday evening, I went to a college fair with my son. He's a sophomore. He's a big planner like I am, so he's already thinking about it. And there was a moment as I sat in the car as we're driving there, I'm like, I am taking my son to a college fair. So yeah, I love having a teenagers because I love seeing the adults they're becoming. We had this long conversation about majors, schools, where he wants to live. Love it. Also about me, I am an Aquarius sun sign, Scorpio moon, Leo rising. If you know what those mean, just know that it's very accurate. I'm also ENFJ, Enneagram 2. If you know what those mean, very accurate. Other parts of who I am. So I'm an author and speaker, but I also have my own business, which I'm launching a consulting for social media and branding. I spoke last week at the local library here about branding. It was super fun to talk to writers. It was a conference I had been years ago. I'm also a chair of a queer nonprofit here, and I live in Johnson County, Kansas. And I enjoy being able to give back to my community. I also wrote a book. I'm working on two other books. I'm working on the next book will be a book about branding yourself authentically and enthusiastically. I'm also working on a self-improvement book that will be titled Living Enthusiastically. It's a follow-up to my first book called Enthusiastically Me. You'll see a theme with enthusiasm, authenticity. That's me. But this is my book. It's my story of discovering a life I'm enthusiastic to live. It is a transition story, but it's not the transition story most people think of. When they see a trans woman has written a book called Enthusiastically Me, they think, oh, I know what this is about. It's about your gender transition. And often people are like, I need to buy this for so-and-so trans family member or trans friend. And I say, this is not exactly what you think of it is. Yes, it's a transition story, but it's a transition before the transition. It starts off in a very, very dark place where I was in 2018. So I also say like, hey, it's not for everyone. This isn't light reading. This is a pretty heavy start to a book, but it is the transition before the transition. The transition before my gender transition is a transitioning from hating myself to loving myself, transition from depression to enthusiasm, transition from being lost to forging my own path. And it was after those were all set in place where the conditions were right for my gender transition to commence. The end of my book is actually the beginning of my gender transition. And I love it. I love it because it tells the story that like life is full of transitions. And I'm nerdy, I'm a writer, so I will talk about the definitions of transitions here for a moment. And because I'm nerdy and an author here, I have a favorite dictionary, Merriam-Webster. The thesaurus is top notch. So I'm very passionate about Merriam's and their thesaurus, but the definitions of transitions. The first one is a change or shift from one state subject plan to another. Second definition is a period or phase in which such a change occurs. When we're talking about our lives, we're talking about one state to another, and that's becoming a new version of ourselves. The end result will be different and hopefully closer to what the life that we want to live enthusiastically and authentically. The definition two, the period when the shift occurs. A transition is a process. It's intentional at some point. But what I find interesting about life transition is that we're often unaware of when they begin. An example is when I talk about my gender transition, people often ask, like, when did you know? And I say, well, like I transitioned at age 39. I found my name March 9th, 2021 at age 39. And that's when I knew I was going to transition. But when I start to think back when the first thoughts began, I actually had a therapist ask me one time, like, when was the first thought? And I kept going back. Like every time I was like, it started here. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, it went back here, back here, back here. One of my first thoughts was around age 9 years old. It was 8 or 9 years old because we lived in this house. But I remember, so I have siblings, I have a younger brother, and collectively my younger brother and I were called boys, and I hated it. And I was like, why can't we call you my name? And I'm like, but I hated my dead name. So at age 9, I hated being called boys and I hated my dead name, but it took me 30 years to figure out that I'm transgender. So often we're going through these transitions before we know, we're unaware, but we're also unaware of whom we'll become. We're often unaware of where we were going. Maybe even know we're in a transition, but we don't know where we're going. And we're also losing parts of ourselves in a transition that we don't necessarily know about, or we do, or we're trying to lose them. We're often unaware that the journey has begun. Like I said, it took me 30 years to figure out I'm transgender, even though I had the thoughts at a pretty young age. And this process of transitioning is happening all the time. And I think of like the process of a transition in 3 parts: gaining parts I love about myself, or gaining parts that you love about yourself, losing parts we don't love, and the journey between the two. And then I think back, so to my transitions before Hazel. So this book is my story up until I found my name and started transitioning socially. But up until 2018, when this book starts, I had this life that you would consider like the American dream. I had a college degree, I had a master's degree, I had a career in insurance. When I started this, when 2018, I was vice president of an insurance company. I was 35 years old. And so you look on it, oh yeah, I was married, had kids, we moved to Kansas City. But in reality, I was becoming more and more miserable. So the transition I was going towards becoming a shell of a person. I was leaving behind, losing any resemblance of authenticity. The journey I was on was taking me down a dark path. I was aware of it to an extent, and honestly, I was seeking therapy and battling substance abuse, so I was aware of the dark path I was going down. And then in 2018, the book starts in March, the day I'll remember forever. And it was the day that I had a plan. And then the book starts there, and then it actually starts a first transition. It starts a transition of, I came out as gay in 2018. The next state of my journey was divorced, and I was dating men. I lost that picturesque suburban American dream. The journey was partying and drinking more. And I'll keep talking about these transitions that I'm going through in that context throughout the story of this book. And it will lead up to where I want to go with the pivotal moment in my life that's affecting today and right now. So in 2018, early 2018, I came out as gay. Late 2018, the next transition was not feeling gay. The next version of myself was this gender nonconforming, pansexual. Gender was sort of a thing I was working with at the time rather than a thing that was absolute. And what I lost was credibility from others and direction for myself. Coming out as gay and then 6 months later being like, I'm not sure if I'm gay. I'm not sure if I'm male. I'm not sure what I like anymore. Yeah, I lost some credibility and I also lost direction. I was very confused. But the journey that I was on was a journey of self-reflection for the first time in my life at age 36. In 2019, the early part of 2019, the transition was a problem, an alcohol problem that was peaking and becoming worse. For me, the next version of myself was sober. I became sober in 2019. What I lost was a social quality of life and a coping mechanism. Even if alcohol is not the best coping mechanism, it was a coping mechanism and my coping mechanism. My journey was through detox. It was self-reflection through detox, sobriety through detox. My journal in that detox. So if you go to detox, I don't recommend it, but unless you need it. But when I went to detox, I was shown my room. There's a bed and a desk, and on the desk is a notebook. And I still have the notebook back here. But I wrote down all my thoughts through the detox process and just all of my life situation. And it actually became chapter 5 of my book called Detox. And people have commented that that's one of the best chapters. And I'm like, well, it's a lot just straight from my thoughts on self-reflection through the journey of the life I used to live to sobriety. After that, I was fired. That was the next transition. I also struggled with relationships. And the next version of me was understanding the relationship cycles I was in, and I was out of work that I was trying to get rid of, but couldn't. What I lost was that quick, continuous relationship I was seeking for so long. The journey for me was breaking, I call her Myra's heart. Myra in the book, I broke her heart and it affected me, and I took some time for self-reflection. In 2020, the next transition I was on, I was dating Sage. The next version of me was this true self I was bringing into a relationship for the very first time. What I lost, they broke up with me. So I lost the love of my life, or so I thought. The journey was accepting the possibility that I could have love as my authentic self. I was still pre-transition, so I was still working on my authentic self. And that was something I actually really appreciated about Sage, was that we were able to explore our gender identity together. Later that year, I had this career shift and I was feeling lost again. I was poorly selling insurance and not making money. And it was a tough time for me. The next step for me, next version of me, was going back into the corporate world. It was an entry level job. So at age 39, I started back at the bottom, and my peers on my team were old enough or were young enough to be my kids. I was 39, they were 21, 22 years old. And I had to start there. What I lost through that transition was my pride. 4 years earlier, I was a vice president of an insurance company, office, all this other stuff goes around with being a vice president of an insurance company. And at that point, at age 39, I was an entry level, essentially college graduate. The journey was determination and resilience to get there. The determination and resilience that I had brought into there and took out of that experience, I still have and will have for the rest of my life. And it helped me build towards something more meaningful, even though I was still in the corporate world. That was the next version of myself, was going back and finding that pattern of getting higher and working towards something and not worrying about the past. What I lost was feeling lost. The journey was working from home. And again, self-exploration. There's a theme here with all these transitions, moving me closer to self-exploration and building upon each step. And then in 2021, I found my name. March 9th, 2021. I actually celebrate March 9th more than my birthday. But I found my name. And that was the next transition. The next version of me was being Hazel, a trans woman, and all the excitement that I had at that moment. What I lost was safety, being afraid of the unknown. When I found my name, I had no idea where I was going, but I was on this journey of self-acceptance as Hazel, as me. And then in that summer, the transition was introducing myself as Hazel. In July 7th, 2021, I introduced myself to a stranger as Hazel for the very first time, and it's something I remember and think about every year. The next version of me was the world started to know me as Hazel, and what I lost was safety and anonymity. Again, I live in the Midwest. I know trans people live here. I know, and I'm friends with many of them, but it's not as much as other places. So I stood out. So I lost the safety and anonymity that I used to have. The journey was coming out, introducing myself as Hazel. And then in New Year's Eve, I had another transition. And it actually is what ends my book, is this letter. It's a promise to myself that I write on New Year's Eve of 2021. The next version of me is embracing living enthusiastically. What I lost was safety. You'll see a theme here. The quiet, sheltered life I used to have. The journey was being in the spotlight. In 2021, the transition became political. I started to transition into advocacy and political action. The next version of me was finding my voice politically. What I lost was the safety and the ability to sit on the sidelines. No longer could I sit in the sidelines and watch something happen. I was getting involved. And then you'll find out later, the transgender and the attacks on us became necessary to be involved. The journey was a political movement. In 2022, I also became more of who I am. I started to change. So in 2021, I transitioned my name socially and everything and started to develop my style. In 2022, I took it to the next level. That was another transition that occurred. My looks started to change. I was blonde in 2022 and just exploring my closet and all, like building it up into what I love. By the way, my closet, which is right over here, has over 200 dresses. I do a lot on social media and I try not to repeat dresses. So I've come a long way in this transition since 2022. What I've lost was the safety of blending in. I stand out. It happens. There's safety in not standing out. But again, I'm being political. I'm building like my brand, building who I am, and I'm losing safety. And the journey was my style and my authenticity. Another transition I had that year was a new passion, the hopes for a new career. I started writing my blog and I started writing my book in late 2022. Again, it's a date and thought I remember. So I had that corporate job. September 2nd, 2022, I took a day off to write. And I remember this day because it was the first time I called myself a writer. I began that transition towards being a writer, eventually about 18 months later, publishing my book and being an author. So the next version of me at that point was Hazel as a writer. What I lost was that safety and that people would begin to know me. I wrote a blog, it's called Enthusiastically You, which is the name of my company. And I wrote it so that people could explore their life that they're enthusiastic to live along with me. And so I was trying to build up this audience. But at that point, so that was 2022. Into 2023, so in 2022, there were some anti-trans laws that were hitting state legislatures, but that was the beginning. It seems like every year we're setting a new record on number of bills in state legislatures. And it was really 2023 when it affected me here in Kansas. There was increased scrutiny on my community, which increased my response. In January through May of 2023, I had this transition that was based on what was going on in Topeka, the state capital. There was a Senate Bill 180, SB 180, which was an outright attack on my rights. That was my next transition. So some of the things happening at the national level, including the definition of gender, that's just kind of silly, but that was happening in Kansas in 2023. The group that is behind all these anti-trans bills were putting different bills in different states to test them to see how they would go. Kansas had one of the most restrictive definitions that has now proliferated the rest of the country. And I read the bill on a Friday night in March. I was single by the time at that time, if you couldn't tell. I was reading Senate bills on a Friday night, and I couldn't even get through the first page without thinking, oh my gosh, I might have to move. I might have to just change my life. The next step for me was relevancy in a political world, because I thought briefly about moving, but I didn't. I lost safety. I lost the safety that was happening because there was actual aggression in the state capitol towards trans people, but I also lost the ability to blend in. I was in rooms and I was the only trans voice speaking up. And it was very hard, but I was losing the fact that I couldn't stand on the side. The journey I was going through was getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Later that year, I was part of this group putting on a town hall, and I was interviewed by the TV news. The next transition I had was becoming more known in the media. I was actually interviewed for an 18-month span. I was interviewed on the TV news 4 times, interviewed on some of the online publications, mini blogs and everything. And this was happening because of the anti-trans bills. These were all happening together. And so the next version of me was becoming relevant in the Kansas City metro as a voice for the trans community. What I lost was safety. Again, there's a theme here with each transition. I'm gaining parts of me and losing parts of me, losing safety often as I'm elevating my voice. People started to know me. I would walk into rooms and people would be like, hey, you're Hazel. That started to happen. The journey was getting comfortable being known, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Later that year, September to December, the next transition was leaving behind the corporate world again. I started my company in late 2023. It's about 2 years old. I started freelancing as a business owner and started working as a server to supplement my income. Again, what I lost was the safety and stability of corporate America. While I am shunning corporate America, there is security, there is safety, because there's a reliability in the paycheck that I was getting rid of and working my own job and working serving jobs. My journey was getting comfortable forging my own path. Also, around that time, I had surgery. Yes. And then I finally had a boyfriend for the first time, despite the fact that I was dating men for 5 years at that point. I never had a boyfriend until then. And I started, the next version of me was dating how I wanted to date, as the girlfriend, as the hoodie stealing girlfriend. And it was so fun. And I loved that transition that I had. But what I lost was safety, because it's difficult dating as a trans woman who wants to date men. Journey was the dating experience, the dating life. And then the next year, I published my book. This is 2024, the transition that kind of gets me into the place where I'm going with this, what happened to me in my aha moment. So I published my book and I was speaking a ton. The next version of me was an author. speaking more, new career goals, feeling like I could do this even if I took a ton of work. What I lost was safety and financial security. The journey was loving my career and becoming myself. Each transition is that way. It's going from where I used to be to the place I want to be, even if I don't know exactly that place. Then in summer of 2024 to the end of October, it was election season. And this is where the journey really changes. Not really changes, but the election of last year gave me a place of pause and decision making. So the journey, many of you, or I don't expect most of you are trans. You may have not known all that was happening around the trans community during the election, or maybe you've forgotten. Um, that would be nice. But that election season was the turning point that shaped my journey. The next version of me was facing threats to my livelihood and my life, and the worry that the election could determine what will happen to me. What I lost was safety and living without anxiety. Headline after headline was about my community. I remember I was working a shift. I don't watch TV, so I didn't see any of the ads, but there was a TV on at the restaurant, and I'm walking to go just fill up a drink or something, and there was an anti-trans ad on the TV above me, and I'm like, this is the life I live right now in this place as me. The journey was, I was worried I wouldn't survive if the election went a certain way. I pulled up some stats on the 2024 election just to give everyone who's either forgotten or not aware of what was happening. So according to NPR, the Republican Party spent $222 million on anti-trans and LGBTQ ads during the 2024 campaign. Democrats spent $29 million. So over the course of the election, $222 million. I will bring that up a couple more times. And ABC News reported the Trump campaign and Republicans spent more than $21 million on anti-trans television ads as of October 9th of last year. That was nearly 1/3 of the 66 million television ads spent during that time. So for every dollar spent on television ads up until October 9th, $1 and $3 was spent on anti-trans ads. Very serious. So of course you would think that that's the big issue, right? No, the Gallup poll, they released a poll that same weekend, October 9th weekend, and listing the concerns of the voters, and transgender people was very, very low. So the people polled, you're going to get 4 categories: extremely important, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important. For transgender, reasons for voting, 18% said extremely important, 20% said very important, 38% said extremely or very, 36% said not at all. So 36%, the biggest proportion, not at all important. 1 in 3 people thought they're not voting on transgender issues, but yet $1 in $3 was spent against us. Just for comparison, the economy, very important in elections, extremely important. 52% said extremely important, 38% said very important. 90% of people who were polled by the Gallup poll said the economy was important. 90%, 9 out of 10. Yet 1/3 of the advertising money was spent on anti-trans ads. Democracy in the US, 49% extremely, 36% very important, 85% total. Yet 1/3 of every dollar was spent on television ads was spent on anti-trans ads. Education, extremely important, 38%, 47% said very, 85% total. Yet 1/3 of the money was spent on anti-trans ads. Terrorism and national security, 83% total, very or extremely important. Again, A third of the money was spent on anti-trans ads. Some of the other issues that were much more important than, remember, 38% of people said transgender issues were important, extremely or very important. 38%. 79% said Supreme Court. 79% said healthcare. 75 said taxes. 75 said crime. 74 gun policy. 72 immigration. 70% said the budget deficit and foreign affairs. 67% abortion. 66% income distribution. 64% situation in the Middle East. 63% said energy policy. 60% said relations with Russia. 59% said relations with China. 62% said trade relations with everyone else. Race relations, 56%. Climate change, 50%. All of those issues were more important in the eyes of the voters, yet $222 million was spent on anti-trans ads. Up on television ads, it was $1 and $3 were spent. So of course, I was a little worried because there's all these problems going on in the country, yet the focus was on me and my community. So the $222 million that was spent in total, OpenSecrets.org, I pulled up these numbers from there. In the 1996 election, total spent by the Republicans was $224 million. So essentially the same. Total in 1996, anti-trans ads in 2025. Democrats that year spent $142 million. As a reminder, Bill Clinton won his second term that year pretty handedly. The 2000 election, the election that changed elections. Side note, the 2000 election, Bush-Gore was my first election that I was able to vote in. Total spent by Republicans, $234 million. Total spent by Democrats, $243 million. So again, the number, total spent on anti-trans ads was roughly the same as total spent by each party in 2000. Just to keep us there. So that was the world that I was in leading up to the election. I was always just worried about my safety, and not the safety necessarily coming from the government, but people being emboldened by the fact that I am being told, they're being told that I am a problem. They're being told something needs to happen with me, and I'm just going about my day. The stress and anxiety around the election was real, and it became worse with every day, week, month leading up to it. So here I was, 3 years into my gender transition, the career that I wanted, stability in my life. At that point, I had my second boyfriend. Not at the same time, I broke up with the first one, had a second one. But all these transitions I had that I described before were leading up to this point, and I was worried it could all be lost if the election went a certain way. Not just what I had built, but my life. And my aha moment was on election day, the night that changed everything. So play back the election day. I never felt comfortable. I never really was going to celebrate anything until it was over. And it was early on that hope faded. When election was all but over, I sat contemplating what I should do. I stayed up really late. I think it was called overnight, but it was pretty clear where it was going. And I stayed up really late, and I thought about all the transition I had gone through, the ones I described here from 2018, the new version of myself over and over and over again, continuously building into the version of me I love, losing parts that I was leaving behind and losing safety in that old life with each step. For a moment, I actually considered laying low, looking for security. So the transition I had in mind was safety and security and leaving behind my dreams and my goals. The journey, if I went that way, would be towards comfort. Instead of being uncomfortable like had been so often before, I was should I lay low? I sat with these thoughts overnight. And what changed my life is I asked myself to just feel. I often do this when it's a big decision, and I encourage others to do the same. When, particularly like going to bed, when we go to bed, our mind's clear, and we wake up, our mind's the clearest possible, and it's the best way to make a decision. So I set aside my thoughts and let my heart decide. As I mentioned, I'm an Aquarius sun, Scorpio moon, Leo rising. The Aquarius sun with Scorpio moon, the qualities are someone potential to revolutionize the world for the better. I have tenacity and drive of the Scorpio side, which pairs harmoniously with the Aquarius hunger to make the world a better place. The Leo risings, the outward persona is characterized by fiery, charismatic, and authoritative presence. Often natural leaders who are confident, generous, and creative. And I'm like, yep, that's me. And I've been those zodiac signs my entire life. But it took last November 2024. I mean, I had those qualities, but it was Hazel facing this decision that was like, what do I do with my life and my dream and my safety? This is the purpose of my life, potentially. And so with the 2024, it made sense. It made sense for me to keep going and going forward. My educational background, I have an economics degree and a speech degree. The speech degree didn't make sense for 20 years, but it made sense finally. My career history finally made sense. All those transitions were bringing me to this place in the life where I'm like, I am going forward with this purpose of life and making this world a better place. I knew what I had to do. When I think back to this day, the first day this was on my book, when I had a plan, I was battling where I was talking before, the decades of depression, decades of substance abuse. I hated my life. But the worst part of all of that time in 2018, when I was my lowest, was the lack of hope. So despite all that was going on last year, there's Democrats blaming the trans community. Democrats were reneging on their promises. By the way, I've abandoned my party affiliation because I can't support a party that doesn't support me. I'm also more liberal than most Democrats. So I abandoned politics and I transitioned to dedicating my life to people and living enthusiastically and living authentically. And that's how I want to make a difference. It's my purpose in life. And so I'm foregoing, leaving behind the safety once again. I'm dedicating my life to people being happy, helping people find inspiration for the life that they love to live, that they should find and pursue the journey to the life that they want to live. And I want to offer hope. That was what I kept going back to, is that the world needs hope. No matter what happens in my future, the worst day of my life is behind me because I almost lost all hope. It's what I struggled with for so long and what I needed to save my life. That little tiny sliver of hope saved my life in 2018. And I'm hoping, striving to be that level of hope for anyone who needs it, because I know the world needed it, needed it as of November 2024. What I lost was safety. I'm elevating my voice in a world that hates me. So often I get negative comments in my email, on my social media, and everything that happens. But I continuously elevate my voice because I want to increase my reach as much as I possibly can. During this process, I had to come to terms with my own death. In January, right around the inauguration, I was updating my life insurance, updating my name, realizing the urgency of having these things in place because I'm trans in America in 2025. but it allowed me to find a place where I no longer fear death. I have a purpose in my life. If I am living my purpose and something happens to me, that's the way to go out, fulfilling the purpose for life. I hope I have many more decades, but if I don't, I'm doing my purpose. I'm not suspending this. I'm not pushing this off. What I lost was the concern about negativity. It happens. It kind of makes me laugh when people are negative to me, and I just let it go because I don't want to hold on to negative energy. Well, my journey is a new message that I can offer. And then again, like, this journey never ends. Oh, I don't know where it's going, right? Like, that was the whole point. We don't know where we're going, but this is the current journey that I'm on. And like all the journeys, I'm gaining parts of my life I love. I love doing this, and I love this opportunity. I'm posting every single day on social media. I'm working on my books. I'm speaking more. My business is growing. My spirituality is growing, and I'm finding Buddhism is like for me. I'm losing parts of my life I don't love. I'm less political. I'm less in the game there and more about helping people. I have lost the control that other people have on my life, and it's incredible. And from this, I just want to offer these words. Every one of our lives are full of transitions. If not, we stagnate. If we're stagnating, that is a transition as the rest of the world is moving past us. The journey and direction. I talked about this many times. We don't know where we're going always. It's not always clear, nor is it always available. But if we keep going, following what we love, following our heart, embracing authenticity, we can get wherever we want. I'm in this place that I love simply because I kept going towards the thing that I love. I hope I've inspired you. I hope that you inspired you to never lose hope. Who you are is an incredibly wonderful person, and never lose hope in who you are. And what you're capable of is incredible, and never lose hope in the things you are capable of. And please find the life you are enthusiastic to live. I wake up every day so excited just to be me, and I think that is what everyone should be. I'm doing this for my life, and it's amazing, and all of you deserve it too. Thank you all so much for this time.
Hazel, thank you. You are such an inspiration. Your enthusiasm and the way that you inspire people is phenomenal. And I thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
We had some viewers laughing about saying that you're beautiful. Thank you so much. The hoodie stealing girlfriend, yes. And I love that you are talking about the duality and polarity of human experiences. This is the hard part of transformation. So some of the comments there.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, yes. I thank you so much for coming back. We'll see you, I think Saturday night, right? You're coming to
Yes.
the Project 2025 panel, which is critical. So if you're watching, please join us for our panels every night at 4 p.m. But Hazel will be back for that. Hazel, thank you so much. Congratulations on all your successes. And I know we'll talk soon.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Hazel. All right, we'll be right back. Who's next? We have Linda Magoon. So stay tuned.